Good evening. And welcome to this special edition of Q&A, live from the Sydney Opera House and the Festival of Dangerous Ideas. I'm Tony Jones, and answering your questions tonight, legendary BBC foreign correspondent Kate Adie, firebrand Marxist philosopher Slavoj Zizek, the author of The Men Who Stare at Goats and the Psychopath Test, John Ronson, Egyptian-born democracy activist Mona Eltahawy, and the foreign editor of The Australian, Greg Sheridan. Please welcome our panel. All right, well, Q&A is live from 9:35 Eastern Time. It's simulcast on ABC News 24 and News Radio, and you can join the Twitter conversation using the hashtag that's just appearing on your screen. Well, our panel tonight includes some quite dangerous thinkers, so let's go straight into peril with our first question from Stuart Lung.
This question is related to sexuality. More and more people are openly embracing other forms of sexuality that are previously considered taboo. For example, polyamory. What is the panel's opinion of openly embracing these other forms of sexuality as an avenue of releasing previously suppressed sexual energy, hence improving the overall well-being of our society?
Stuart, can I just keep you on your feet just for a moment?
Sure.
Because at least some of our audience are going to wonder what polyamory is. Could you just explain that for us?
Well, the way I understand polyamory is where you love more than one person with honesty and integrity.
OK, all right. Let's start with Kate Adie.
This time of night, I have to consider this. We live, I hope, in more liberal societies where we don't actually impose rules which were thought up by old men a long time ago. I think what you have to do is not think about, gosh, how many different ways you can have different relationships and conduct them. You have to think about what sort of person you are and what you mean to someone and what someone means to you. And never betray. Don't ever go out to do something which will hurt so much. Just be a loving person. And if that takes you into different relationships and you behave decently, I don't think we have too much to worry about.
Slavoj Zizek.
Unfortunately, I would like to agree with you, but my evil nature pushes me in the opposite direction.
You don't love me?
Sorry?
You don't love me?
I take the Fifth Amendment. I refuse to answer because the answer may incriminate me and so on.
No. Also, you're pledged to Lady Gaga, or so they say.
This is a mystery. I'm an old conservative who thinks that everything that happened in pop music happened between 65 and 75. That's another story. But listen, you know, we are entering a strange era where hedonism, do you notice, is more and more the ruling ideology. Today, society doesn't pressure you on to sacrifice yourself for your country, but be authentic, be what you truly are, and so on and so on. And my psychoanalytic friends are telling me that people today more and more feel guilty, not if they give way to their perverse desires, but if you don't enjoy. We live in strange times where if you are not able to enjoy sexuality or whatever, you feel guilty. So I think, and that's the paradox today. We live in permissive times. The result is not everybody is happy screwing around. Dirty words are permitted, you told me. The result is on the opposite. There is more frigidity, impotence than ever, and so on and so on.
Isn't it true that you advocate outsourcing sex so other people can have sex on your behalf?
No, I'm quite romantic here. Unfortunately, a bad taste joke. What I am advocating quite seriously,
like
and there
great idea.
Stop, is love. Naive love. I claim I have nothing against sex without love. But I think the structure, like we usually say, what is masturbation? You do it to yourself just with the partner you are dreaming about. But what if
real... sort of mental outsourcing.
Yeah, but most of our real sex, I think, is masturbation with the real partner. You have a real partner there, but you just use the real partner to realize your dream. So is all sex like that? No, it's love. Which is why today I claim, this is very old-fashioned romantic idea, What is transgressive is not sex. You can do it with animals, with dogs, with cats, no problem. Falling in love is a problem, which is why, as I mentioned yesterday, more and more you have these dating and marriage agencies advertising their services in this way. We will enable you to be in love without falling in love, without the fall.
Okay.
Like, everything will be safe and so on.
Slavoj, I'm going to throw to John because you picked up the outsourcing point. Do you have your own view? I mean, the question was, should non-conventional forms of sexuality be embraced as a means of releasing previously suppressed sexual energy?
God. I don't know. Can I just say that I'm glad to be in the centre of the panel because my ideological position is one of uncertainty.
Centre-left, you are.
Doubt.
Like this
Centre-left.
opportunistic social democrats who pretend they are on the left, but...
I was a bit disappointed that polyamory was something so nice. I thought it was going to be something like slamming your penis in a filing cabinet. I'm in favour of that. But...
That doesn't sound like as much fun as you make it.
Well, you know, I'm with Kate. I'm with both Kate and Slavoj on the idea that naive love actually sounds like quite a good idea.
And even a dangerous idea today.
Let's throw the dangerous idea to Mona. What do you think?
Well, I think as long as you have consenting adults who are choosing to live this way, but, and this is a huge but, this is something that is open to both men and women. I'm all for it because you'll find, and it's not just Islam, but religions like Mormonism and others that do allow multiple marriages, the multiplicity is always given to the men. And there is this bizarre idea that men's sex drive is somehow higher than women's, and that's just total crap because women have just as much of a sex drive as men do, and in many cases women's sex drive outpaces men's sex drive. But the way so many people are socialized is that no, the men have to enjoy as many women as possible because they have this insatiable sex drive, whereas women, you know, you're taught to be good, you're taught to be virginal, you're taught to be chaste. So in the case of societies where you're socialized like that, I think sex is a political act. Getting out there and getting over the sexual guilt that is put, especially on women, in conservative societies is a political act. So as long as what you're saying is open to all genders and men and women, if we're now just talking about men and women, are able to enjoy that kind of lifestyle equally, I'm all for it. But unfortunately, a great deal of hypocrisy goes into this and women are told, accept that, you know, the 3 or 4 of you will share this one guy because he's just so insatiable, and that's just bullshit. It's not true. It's something that just massages men's egos, and it's just crap.
Let me just quickly jump in there. Would polygamy be okay, in your view, if women were able to take multiple husbands?
Yeah, if women could, but the thing is they can't. And so I want to ban polygamy as long as women can't. Are you gonna be my third husband?
Sorry?
Are you gonna be my third husband?
He was tapping me on the shoulder, not you.
Yeah, both of you.
I just wanted to make, and please then stop me, I need a domina, a woman. No, quite seriously. No, don't be too much in love with, I think it's called polyandry, the other way around.
Women, yeah.
You know, they have it in traditional Tibet. And I can tell you, the explanation is quite a vulgar Marxist one. You have a farmer who has 4 or 5 sons. The problem is how to prevent the farm being split. You marry all of them to one woman, and it's strictly hierarchic. No, it's not you who says in the evening, tonight it's your turn.
But he's not talking about that. He's talking now about getting over these taboos. I understand, and and that lifestyle is dying out now as societies like Tibet and India become more modernized and people don't live like that anymore. But he's talking about getting over taboos, and for me the biggest taboo is to cut this crap that pretends that men have higher sex drives than women. They don't.
Let's I want to hear from the other end of the panel first. Greg Sheridan's been dying to get in on this subject.
Tony, this is
because he's on my far left.
Yeah, no, look, sitting on the far left of the panel as I am, this is a question which Irish Catholic boys often contemplate as they grow up and become News Limited journalists, where, of course, we're labelled now by Bob Brown as the love media, and everybody knows that we have a loving relationship, a polyamorous relationship, with our millions and millions of readers. But look, I would just make one...
I'd hate to think about what you're doing when you're writing your columns.
I'm commuting on a higher plane, James. In fact, the ABC asked if they could commission a series At Home with the Foreign Editor, and I said no. I said there have to be limits. But look, I'd like to make one serious point. One of the madnesses of our society is that it can never do anything in balance or in proportion. We are a society determined to take every stupid idea to its most extreme possible conclusion. So we are, all of us, reacting against the Victorian rules that, as kids, we read about in English novels. And we spend our whole lives rebelling against these rules which haven't existed for 100 years. And then we recognise no end point, no point of restraint, no point of common sense, and no point of balance. I would agree with Slavoj. I'm an old-fashioned romantic, and I think if you just fall in love and stay in love, that's the best thing.
OK, I'm going to cut it off on that point of agreement because we can't spend all night talking about sex. We've got other subjects. You're watching Q&A where you ask the questions. Our next question tonight comes from...
subjects.
You'll get your chance. Joseph Ackland.
Can psychopaths integrate into society, or is society already full of psychopaths occupying the roles of our leading high flyers and power brokers?
OK.
Yeah, John, this is your specialty subject.
Yeah, well, I mean, I should start with this statistic. The statistic is, according to Hare, the inventor of the checklist, 1 in 100 regular walking around people is a psychopath. So there's... I believe there's 300 people in this room, so there's 3 psychopaths in this room.
Are they all on the panel?
Well, I'm rather hoping that they're not the ones sitting behind us, because, you know, they'll have the advantage. So 1 in 100 regular people is a psychopath, but 4% of CEOs are psychopaths. You're 4 times more likely to have a psychopath at the top than you are to have one as your subordinate, because capitalism rewards psychopathy, and this is the problem, is that the more ruthlessly... I spent time with a man who used to live here called Chainsaw Al Dunlap. He used to work with Kerry Packer, and he allowed me to do... He was a ruthless asset stripper, and he allowed me to do the psychopath checklist on him. So I went through it. I said, OK, grandiose sense of self-worth, which would have been hard for him to deny because he was standing underneath a giant oil painting of himself at the time. He said, you've got to believe in you. And he kind of went through the checklist and identified many of the items on the psychopath checklist as business positives that are rewarded in our capitalist systems. That's the problem. The problem isn't so much the kind of maverick, ruthless psychopaths in charge. It's the system that rewards them and cheers them on. And the more psychopathically people like Al Dunlap behave, the more the share prices shot up. And you only have to look at the American healthcare system, for instance, to see that, you know, it's a system that echoes the psychopath checklist. It's a real problem.
Okay, we've got a question that's come in via our Facebook page. It's from Rob Crasty, and it's for John Ronson. How can we recognise a psychopath in politics? Before we vote for a politician, what signs, behavioural and verbal, should worry us that they may be a psychopath?
OK, well, it's a 20-point checklist. You've got grandiosity, you've got glibness, superficial charm. I mean, so far we're with all politicians, right? You've got lack of remorse and lack of empathy. Again, most politicians. Are you putting your hand up as a... somebody's, like, fessing up to this?
No, he wants to make a comment, and you can. Go ahead.
In fairness, John, I read the Hare psychopathy checklist before coming here tonight, and I did want to ask you, in your considered opinion, is our Prime Minister a psychopath?
You know what? I'm not going to start. I think
come on!
I think it's unlikable to diagnose people without having met them.
We can see it up.
I mean, that's the truthful answer. I think
Let's go for the extremes. What about Hitler and Stalin? Psychopaths?
Well, I think, you know, if you've got a kind of grotesque costume, a kind of uniform that's kind of garish, plus a penchant for genocide, that's a big clue. If you get them onto the subject of empathy, what they hate is weakness. They hate weakness. And so if you can get them to talk about how empathy really is a weakness, that's a big clue. However, I don't want people to get drunk with power. I don't want people to read either my book or the Hair Checklist and become, like I did, a power-crazed psychopath spotter, because that can turn you a little bit psychopathic, so be slightly wary of that.
Let's hear from the rest of our panel. Kate was going to jump in there.
What does it profit us to actually label people as psychopaths, to actually analyse and say they are psychopaths? Partly because, to me, you seem to be describing the kind of ruthless bastards who get to the top in every kind of walk of life. And if you're going to label them and say these are psychopaths, what are you going to propose to do about it? Do they live in a pen somewhere saying, don't let them out, don't give them something to run?
No, you don't do that. And in fact, they are trying to do that in America. They are trying to, people who are coming up for parole are being scored on the psychopath checklist.
What about people standing for president?
And yeah,
I mean,
I totally agree with you. Labelling is clearly in our society a tyrannical and problematic thing. However, psychopathy exists. It's a difficult
situation. And you say it
situation.
can't be cured.
And the evidence is that it can't be cured, or unless you get them
Okay, once you've got them, what do you do with them?
Well, let's hear from Slavoj. He might have an answer.
No, I have an answer to that.
I see things in a much more... Would you agree or not? It's a so-called serious question. When we talk about people like Hitler and so on, listen, I read a book on the history of SS, German, and especially a chapter on Reinhard Heydrich. He organized, Wannsee Conference, Holocaust, and so on. What strikes me so much is that, this guy, if there ever was an evil guy, it's him. You know what he was doing in the evenings? He gathered with his SS friends.
Playing Mozart.
And even better, Beethoven string quartets. And I think that's the really tragic, depressing thing. You cannot say, oh, they must have gotten it wrong or whatever. No, the tragic lesson of history is, and I can go on through, read a book which is the Bible for me. Brian Victoria, a Zen monk, it's called Zen at War. It demonstrates how the large majority of Zen Buddhists in Japan not only totally supported Japanese military expansionism, but provided the properly Zen Buddhist justification for it. To amuse you very shortly, D.T., Daisetsu Taro Suzuki, when we were young hippies, the glorious propagator in the hippie West of Buddhism. He not only fully supported Japanese invasion of China, but he faced this problem. I have to kill you in war. He said, if I remain caught in the illusion of Maya ordinary reality, I perceive myself as an agent killing you. I may hate you, who knows, but it's difficult for me. Then he says, if you go through a Buddhist enlightenment, you see that you have no self, you became a passive observer of your acts, and I no longer perceive me stabbing a knife into your eye as my act, but just as he puts it, my knife is dancing around, and in the cosmic dance of phenomena, your eye seems to stumble upon it. Was he psychopath or not? This is now a more tragic phenomenon. We find people like Bertrand.
Mate, I'm just putting my pen on this side.
Yeah.
Let's hear from John.
Just one more, then I will stop.
One more, okay.
The main definition of psychopath for me is also a person who is too identified with what he is. Like, for example, Jacques Lacan, my favorite dogmatic reference, he said something very nice. He said, a madman is not only a beggar who thinks he is a king. A madman is also a king who thinks that he is a king. And I think this is why I think that King's Speech, I wonder if you will agree, it's an extremely reactionary film. It tells the story of a guy...
No, we know.
He's a good, normal guy.
It's a very long story.
No, I'm not telling. Just, calling free place a guy who stutters as a sign of morality. He knows it's stupid to be a king. And your Australian guy teaches him to become stupid enough to believe that he is really a king.
Okay. All right. John, and we'll hear from the other side of the panel.
Okay, I'm going to answer the two questions very briefly. Yes, saying that this person's eye got in the way of my knife is an indication of psychopathy, because they do tend to blame the victim. But the answer to Kate's question is, I completely sympathise with the notion that mental health labelling is a very, very difficult and in worst case, tyrannical thing. However, psychopathy exists. It's a real condition. And I think, one shouldn't shy away from than really understanding the crazy ways we behave when our brains go wrong. And what do you do with them? The answer is, of course, you don't lock them up. You don't end up like some villain in an Orwell novel. What you do is you just be aware. You just be wary. You just don't let them fuck with you.
Let's hear from Greg Sheridan. You've dealt with an awful lot of Australian politicians. Have you ever noticed any that exhibit psychopathic tendencies?
Tony, I've interviewed and written about a lot of psychopaths in my time, but let me give you the two ends of the spectrum. Normally, when you interview a politician, you start with flattery, and no matter how outrageous the flattery, it's never enough. You say, Kevin, Tony, whoever, you're the greatest orator since Cicero, and the response is, why do you think Cicero was so great? You know? But I interviewed once Manmohan Singh, the Prime Minister of India, and I started with my flattery. You've changed the course of the river of Indian human life with your economic reforms. His response was, if you're going to talk rubbish like that, leave now. If you want to talk about economic policy, you can stay. Now, the other end of the spectrum, I spent an evening once with Saif Gaddafi, Muammar Gaddafi's most famous son.
The doctor from LSE.
Yeah, LSE, and great artist, and, you know, hole-in-one 7 times, swam, 100 miles in 8 minutes and so on. And during the course of our interview, I said, what's it like being Colonel Gaddafi's son? He said to me, well, you know, our dad doesn't realise that we're just normal Libyan kids. We like to ski in Switzerland, shop in Paris, just like every other normal Libyan. And I thought, there's a guy who doesn't have much empathy. So I'm glad Manmohan Singh is Prime Minister and Saif Gaddafi is not.
Well,
let's hear from Mona, because there've been an awful lot of
the Middle East, psychopaths?
In the dictatorships of the Middle East. Saddam Hussein, the Assad father and son, Gaddafi's just been named.
I did not meet Saddam Hussein. I attended news conferences with senior and junior Assad, but I want to share my Gaddafi story, which I travelled around the world with, and it has more to do with sex than psychopathy, but why not? We'll combine both questions. And it ties in exactly with this, our father. Not so much the sons, but the guards, and not the female guards of Gaddafi. And I call it Nipplegate, because I was attending a news conference in Libya in 1996, when it was actually a former colleague, she still works for the BBC. We saw Gaddafi standing on a podium, standing by himself. So me and my friend from the BBC went to ask him some questions, and he said, yes, you can ask us. And he's standing on the podium. And a news conference, impromptu news conference. And then all of a sudden, the psychopaths from the Ministry of Information, now these are the minders who follow you around. We were talking about China earlier. These are the minders who follow you around in Libya. Tried to push me out, and someone tried to grab my tape recorder, so I bit his hand, and this is all being filmed in the news conference. And then one of the male bodyguards, and again, this is an indication of just how, when the psychopath is at the top, it trickles down. I mean, the economy in Libya didn't trickle down, but the madness certainly did. And so that the guard is standing there with his AK-47, and he's trying to push me out. And I push him back. He pushes me, I push him back, and then he twisted my nipple in the middle of the news conference, just like that. Titty twister, I think it's called. And I'm sitting there going, what the fuck? Oh my God. And so I turned to Muammar Gaddafi, who in Egypt we call brother colonel, because he took over from the king. He got rid of the king in a coup. He was a captain. He promoted himself to colonel, not to general, so his ego wasn't that crazy, but just a colonel. And in Egypt we call him brother colonel, Akhil Akid. So I'm like, Akhil Akid, look what he's doing to me. And Gaddafi and I make eye contact for about 5 seconds. And I thought, he's going to jump in with his, Arab pride and Arab chivalry and say, how dare you violate the honor of my Arab sister? And he just looks at me and then just continues like nothing is happening. And I thought, these people are fucking lunatics. And so I push the guy and I kick him, and it goes on. And then the news conference finishes. My press badge has disappeared. So I thought, okay, this madness was because they want to get rid of my press badge. Then this Algerian journalist comes up to me and he's like, Mona, are you okay? Are you okay? I go, did you see what you did to me? He goes, they were saying, just shoot her, just shoot her. So I share this story because, again, when the psychopathy is up there and it's not checked, it goes not just into the sons, but it goes into everybody. It poisons the water.
Hang on, it's not so much psychopathy. Having interviewed Gaddafi a number of times, and once I decided people...
Did he twist your nipple as well, Kate?
I worked out he wasn't really bright enough to actually belong to your pantheon of psychopaths. What actually keeps a lot of people who are in power there, what trickles down is not a psychopathic attitude, it's fear. There is in all people who attain a certain amount of power over others. It then begins to accrete. It then spreads, and everybody gets more and more scared. All the little minions around him just quaked. I once saw a number of ministers in front of him. He came into the room. One of them was so scared that he shook so much he fell over in sheer fear. It's not that they become psychopaths, it's that a lot of very powerful people maintain their style, their power, because they actually threaten other people. They don't change their character, they just make them scared. I'm going
to interrupt there because let's move on to the moment where that fear seems to have evaporated in the Middle East. We've got a few questions on this subject. This is Q&A, it's live and interactive. Our next question comes from Farid.
This is to Professor Zizek. You've been compared most recently in an Al Jazeera op-ed, maybe unfavourably, to Muammar Gaddafi for being out of touch and sticking to an old ideological worldview when faced with the rapid changes undergone in the Arab uprisings. What is your view now of what's happening in the Middle East, and do you think what is commonly called as the Arab Spring has turned into an Arab winter of discontent?
First, I would like to know the precise nature of that. In what sense was I compared with Gaddafi? My only link with Gaddafi is my French enemies from Libyan School of Economics, once called London School of Economics, were attacking me as being totalitarian or what. My God, I mean, they were getting all the money from Gaddafi and so on.
I think it was sort of an analogy that by Al Jazeera saying you were as out of touch as Gaddafi, really. That's
out of touch with what? My public reaction to Arab Spring was a text published by Guardian on Tahrir Square miracle and so on, where I absolutely emphasized what I think is crucial. The Western, okay, hypocrisy, everybody knows this, but what type of hypocrisy? Listen, this was my metaphor. The official desire of the West all the time was, oh my God, the only way to mobilize Arab people is through religion, anti-Semitism, fanaticism, and so on. If only there were to be some secular, purely democratic uprising. Now that we got it, we are afraid. Yes. Like, what's going on, new dangers, and so on. And I compare this in my tasteless nature, since we talk about sex, with, did you see Francois Truffaut's film Day for Night, where it's a side story, a young boy wants to sleep with a script girl, finally they are alone, and he tells her, okay, now we are alone by a lake, let's do it quickly, and so on. Oh, I'm dreaming for years to screw you. And the girl simply says, okay, why not? And starts to unbutton her trousers. And he is in total panic. Like, how? Do you mean just like that or whatever? Aren't we a little bit like that towards Egypt, I mean? You know why? Because, they did what we demanded from them, and the result is shock. Yes. So the tragedy is another one. My hope is with Tahrir Square. My hope is with Mousavi. I was deeply involved supporting Mousavi in Iran. Why? Because Mousavi precisely was the way I see it, and I know a very well situation there. He is definitely not the Ahmadinejad corruption, but he is also not a so-called pro-Western liberal, and so on. He's something authentically third way, which is why we in the West had such difficulties to place where does he belong, Mousavi. For some people, it's the same as Ahmadinejad, it doesn't matter. So again, all my admiration goes to Tahrir Square, and my whole point was precisely don't assimilate it into a simple pro-Western uprising, and so on and so on.
Well, Zizek,
okay, all right, let's hear from Mona.
You know why the West, so-called West, is having such a hard time with this? Because for such a long time, they only saw the people from the Middle East or North Africa, where I come from, as either psychopaths and dictators or lunatic fundamentalists. Yeah. And the rest of us who were in the middle and kept saying, look, hello, there's a whole bunch of us here.
Why do you say the West is having a hard time with this? When
I'll tell you
another way of looking at it would be that many in the West are sighing with relief that democracy is finally coming to these countries.
Let me tell you
I'm not necessarily talking about the leaders that back the dictators, but people.
Let me tell you what happens when I give these talks in various American campuses. I get questions like, what in the Egyptian fabric prepares you for freedom. Like we're some kind of fucking barbarians who don't know how to live our own lives. And the reason that we have been unable to live our own lives in our countries is because these very people who elected these very governments stood in our way, and they knew it. And I want to talk about the leaders, though, because the United States right now, just 4 or 5 days ago, they called our Supreme Council of Mubaraks, which are the 19 military men who currently run Egypt, all Mubarak's friends. Hillary Clinton called them a force of stability and continuity, just what she used to call Mubarak. The United States is about to sell Bahrain $53 million of weapons. To do what? Kill its own people. And the United States says, we're doing this because Bahrain is a force of continuity and stability. And American people do not, I mean, not just American people, but the whole point of my lecture here yesterday, for anyone who attended, for those who didn't attend, it was called Hypocrisy Rhymes with Democracy. Right here in Australia too, you guys are having a hard time because you guys also are scared of the Muslim men with beards because you guys do not see the nuances of where I come from. It's not just in America.
Let me throw that to Greg Sheridan to see if he agrees with you.
Well, you know, I don't want to be a party pooper here and spoil the good fun, but we actually have to take each of these countries separately, and the situations are very complicated and they're very contested. We don't know how to feel about the Arab Spring yet because we don't know how it's going to work out. One thing that we don't discuss very often is that the Egyptian economy...
We do support democracy, though, don't we?
Of course,
I mean,
of course.
So
of
we
course.
know about that.
Yeah,
we know that much, don't we?
Yeah, of course. But the mere fact that somebody votes for you doesn't make you a good guy. A lot of people voted for Adolf Hitler. Doesn't make him a good guy. And one thing we don't discuss in Egypt,
so, well, let me just ask you very briefly, would you rather see Mubarak still there because of the stability that he represented?
No, certainly not. No, and there's a lot to be encouraged about the Arab Spring, and wonderful people, liberals, friends of mine are involved in it and working their guts out. But 2 points I want to make to you, Tony. One is that the Egyptian economy is absolutely on the rack, and eventually every political system, whether it's democracy or something else, has to deliver something to its people. One of the things it has to deliver is bread. The second point I'd make is that the situation in Egypt and in all those North African countries is fiercely contested, and some of the people I'm privileged to know who are great people who are involved in the contest, and some of the people in the contest have very evil ideologies. The people who has
the evil ideology?
Well, I think the Muslim Brotherhood, according to my friend Tarek Hegi, is unreformed, its moderation is fake, it's temporary and it's tactical. And it's internally split. I understand there are a lot of nuances, you can't do it all in a short TV program, but there are a lot of die-hard, serious Islamists there filled with extremist ideology.
But let's talk about the Muslim Brotherhood getting into parliament, which they will, because they will be voted in because they are Egyptian and they represent a good number of Egyptians. They don't represent me. I'm not a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. I would vote for someone else. But let's talk about the Muslim Brotherhood.
Well, according to them, you're never allowed to be president because you're a woman.
And that's wrong. And if they don't change that platform, and that platform, that point in their platform is coming under a great deal of attack by young members of the Muslim Brotherhood. But let's talk about the Muslim Brotherhood. Entering parliament, the Muslim Brotherhood will then have to deliver to the people who voted for them. The Muslim Brotherhood and whoever else is in the Egyptian parliament will have to fix roads, will have to fix subway lines, will have to fix the curriculum, i.e. they will have to be politicians. What concerns me as an Egyptian who is secular and liberal and not going to vote for the Muslim Brotherhood is that we have a constitution that guarantees I can vote them in and vote them out. So you can't just sit there and say the Muslim Brotherhood is evil. No, the Muslim Brotherhood will be evil if they don't deliver on what the constituents want them to deliver. Yeah. So I urge
hope that democracy works that way.
I'm going to interrupt this dialogue over here just to bring in this side.
I do think that we have a contemporary habit of expecting democracy to spring instantly. If you look at Iraq and Afghanistan, it's going to take a long time, particularly in Afghanistan. And I think we expect it. We expect next week somebody to get parliamentary elections. We expect people to sort out political parties, a la Western states. It's not going to happen like that. We took 800 years in Britain to get from a king running everything, with the religious people right next to him laying down the law, to a form of parliamentary democracy. It took us 800 years.
Hang on, we've got a couple of people in the audience with their hands up. Yes, you will, but I want to hear from our audience as well. So a quick comment from both of these two people with their hands up, starting with you.
Yes, Mr. Sheridan. Communism in its purest form is about spreading the wealth around, and whoever people are, they may be able to concede that there have been some bad Labor prime ministers in this country.
Okay, I'm
but
sorry.
whenever
I'm going to interrupt you because you're actually off topic.
No,
sorry, you're off topic. Let's go to this person.
Do you think democracy could work better if there was a separation between religion and state?
Yeah, okay. Slavoj.
Yeah, no, first, if I may just return to the previous question, it's a very important point, where I nonetheless disagree, and I think I will say something terribly politically correct now. It has maybe slight racist overtones, is this idea of, oh, but Arabs need hundreds of years. Sorry, Afghanistan, as I said yesterday, 40 years ago, was a very tolerant, multicultural country. Afghanistan is not an old traditional country which now we slowly have to bring to civilization. When I was young, I was in Afghanistan as a child. I saw in Herat, the other city. Afghanistan, as you know, 40 years ago, had a relatively enlightened pro-Western monarch, had a strong local communist party and so on. The way Afghanistan was caught into world politics made it fundamentalist. It's not there a primitive country that we have to civilize. We screwed it up.
But I want to say something else to what you were saying, Greg. It touches on what you're saying, religion and politics. You know, you talk about the Muslim Brotherhood. Let's talk about the Christian Brotherhood of the United States. Because I always tell my American friends, we might have the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, but there is a Christian Brotherhood in the United States. And the Christian Brotherhood in the United States, unlike the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, has actually had an impact on foreign policy because George Bush apparently heard God tell him to invade Iraq. And in the name of this...
Where did George Bush ever say that? That's ridiculous.
You want me to get that for you from a news conference? I will. I will email it to you. I'll send it to you by Twitter. No,
George
it's actually
W. Bush
true.
never said that.
He did.
You made it up.
No, I did not make it up.
There's
George
something in
Bush.
your coffee.
No, actually,
Hang on, John wants to get in here.
Wait,
on his behalf, I'm going to say, please let John come in.
Just to support what Mona said, George Bush not only said that, but he had a presidential prayer team who would meet every week and pray for...
And the Christian Brotherhood of the United States...
George W. Bush for saying prayers, but that's not the same as saying
didn't he say
that
God told me
told
to
him
liberate
invade
Iraq?
Yeah,
he did. He did.
No, he
and
didn't.
not just that, beyond that,
crazy.
the Christian coalition in the United States has consistently had an impact on US foreign policy vis-a-vis Israel, on US foreign policy generally. You have a Christian coalition in the United States that has power, even though I live in a country that supposedly has separation between religion and state. So don't preach to the Middle East and North Africa about separating religion and state when you have a Christian fundamentalist president who says, I'm invading a country because God told me to give them freedom.
Now, that's complete rubbish. That's complete rubbish. Complete rubbish.
Hold on.
He never said that. He never said that. And nowhere in any of his justifications for the actions of Iraq or any of John Howard's justifications is there anything like that.
I can't speak for John Howard. I don't know how fundamentalist he is, but I'll get you both.
I'm going to change tack. I'm going to change... No, I'm sorry. I'm in charge here.
No, but...
I'm sorry. Let's move along. Our next question comes from Eleanor Doyle-Markwick.
This question is again for Slavoj. You're a supporter of... I apologise, Tony. You're a supporter of Julian Assange. I too support his push for open, transparent government. However, I don't believe the anonymity and safety of dissidents should be sacrificed to the cause. Do you agree, or are redacted documents, like sex with a condom, just not as good?
Okay, again. It's a long story, yeah. Let me be very...
Just go to the summary.
Yeah. But just, okay, I will start with... you know what? The problem with me... No, when you said God and so on. Sorry, but the standard argument, with all my mega sympathy for Israel, but it worries me how the Western civilization can pretend to be secular and so on, and then the answer I get from American politicians, it can be put in a more refined way, like it's cultural. My God, one of the guys who will maybe be president said
I'm going to interrupt you.
God gave them the country. Sorry, in the state of Israel,
we're not talking about God now. We're talking about Julian Assange. Some people...
I will go back to Assange.
Some people may think they're the same thing.
What you say about that condom stuff and so on, listen. I know the story in detail because I have friends in Sweden. I think this is a ridiculous excess of political correctness which will backfire onto women because it's a fake.
No.
Yeah, she asked me about condoms.
No, that was no. It wasn't. Sorry, I'm sorry, but that was an analogy. She was simply saying that the lack of protection for the dissidents who actually were named in the cables, exposed by Wikileaks, meant that they didn't have the sort of protection you might have with a condom if you were having sex. It's an analogy.
Okay, let me go quickly then. You know what's for me, why do I support Assange? First, I think that on the contrary, what he did with documents was extremely restrained, double-checking, and so on. Where did this crazy idea come that he's just throwing them out? But something else is important.
Well, it came right from the very beginning, actually, when the first tranche of Afghan military documents were released, and people who were informants were named. So people who'd been talking to the American or the Australian military were named in those documents. Their names were not redacted.
Okay, let's not go into detail. We can go there.
They're important, these details.
No, because I would contest this in detail. I know in detail the story. Okay. What fascinated me in Afghanistan or northern Iraq, it's crucial, is that shot from a camera from a helicopter, where you can clearly see, I don't know who are, maybe Taliban, I don't care, but some soldiers clearly, explicitly wanting to surrender to the Americans. The helicopter pilot phones back, what do? Basically, he get the message, shoot them, we take no prisoners, and so on. So, okay, but another point.
Sorry, that was in Iraq, so they weren't Taliban.
Yeah. But let me get to my point finally. It's not, the point about Assange is not what we learned. Did we really learn anything new globally? No, it's just what we expected. It's, you know, life is hypocritical in the sense that there are things that are going on, but we allow those in power to pretend to act as if they don't go on. That's why it's important. It's not what we learned. It's that those in power cannot pretend to act as if this is not going on.
Slavoj,
and I think this outweighs all the problems.
We've got to find an end to a sentence at some point. Just hang on, we'll go to John.
Slavoj, in saying let's not go into detail, what you just did with a wave of your hand was dismiss somebody who puts ideology over human life and human safety. It was despicable what Assange did. To send out these documents without that. And he was asked, wasn't he, at one point, well, what about the safety of the people that you named? And he said, well, if they worked for, I mean, I believe this is true, he said, well, if they work for the government, then they're fair game. I mean, that's, to put ideology over life is a terrible thing. And, you know, is this not what we're all doing here? Are we not just kind of reaching, you know, because there's kind of fetishization of extreme ideological positions on television and in politics and so on. You know, it's you know, the more respected somebody is, it relates to how ideological, how extreme their position is. And, you know, this is a problem in our world. Uncertainty and doubt.
I just want to hear description. I think the category of life that you are using here is pure ideology.
Okay.
I don't have time to explain it.
No, fair enough. I want to hear from Kate.
Well, as a journalist, I think I begin to wonder, and looking at all that Assange did, is, first of all, what governments do, and that very few of us actively think about how much governments keep secret and what they do in their name and what they do to protect people who do things which they do not want public, and whether that desire not to have it public is right or wrong. We're all in democracies lazy about this. Vast numbers of countries have all kinds of laws which say whatever the government does can be kept secret for years and years and years. And we go, And we don't think, why? And I think we're lazy about deciding what should be secret, what your government should keep from you as an ordinary citizen, and what it should do to protect, if we agree, those people who might be vulnerable, whom the government thinks should stay out of the public eye. We're lazy about it. We just say, oh, yeah, the government doesn't tell us. Well, if in a democracy, we should be inquiring. We should know where those decisions are made. We have...
Let's, I'm going to go across to Mona, and you can perhaps give us an assessment of whether WikiLeaks played a significant role in the Arab
I'm so glad you asked me
Spring.
this. You mean the WikiLeaks revolution? Not. Nothing pisses people off in the Middle East more than hearing these revolutions and uprisings were WikiLeaks revolutions, for many reasons. Primarily, in a country like Tunisia, and even in Egypt, none of the major media outlets, especially those state-controlled, were allowed to publish Cablegate. So we were reading about these things outside of the region. So the scenario didn't go, Mohammed Bouazizi picked up the newspaper in Sidi Bouzid, thought, oh my God, my regime is so corrupt, I'm going to go out there and overthrow them. It didn't work like that. And second of all, the people in the region, just like you were saying, Zizek, they all knew of this stuff. They all knew. They were dying for the international community to say something. They pleaded, all these activists used to plead with the various Western governments that propped up their dictators to stop propping them up because they were so corrupt.
Mona,
so they knew
can I just
all of
interrupt
this.
there? Because Assange makes the argument that because of Cablegate, because of all this material being out there, that the Western governments were not able to intervene to prop up those dictatorships during the Arab Spring. That's his argument.
They continued to. My God, did you see how long it took for the US administration, for example, to actually get on the right side and say the right thing? They fumbled around for days, and to this day, they continue to say the Supreme Military Council of Mubaraks, as I call them, is a force of stability and continuity. If anything, Cablegate and what WikiLeaks has been revealing is the need. There should be a revolution in DC. There should be a revolution here. The revolution belongs outside because basically what's happening is the supposedly democratically elected governments are hypocrites, and if you didn't know before, now you know. What are you going to do about it? That's the revolution.
Let's hear
We've
from
all got lazy
think-
about
I
it.
think-
That is what it is. In so many democracies now, we take having a vote for granted.
I actually think
we
the
just
lesson...
don't get off our butts and do anything.
I'm just going to hear from Greg down there.
I think the political lesson out of WikiLeaks is something quite different, and you'll be astonished to hear, Mona, that I may disagree with you on this point.
I'm shocked.
I know you are. I know you are. But you know, that's we aim to please, we in the love media. But I think the big lesson out of WikiLeaks is that democracies tell the truth and dictatorships tell lies. What was fascinating out of WikiLeaks... Well, if you let me, I'll explain. What was fascinating out of WikiLeaks was Mahmoud Abbas begging Israel to take action against Hamas, the Saudis begging the Americans to take action against the Iranians. And in the broadest sense, everything the Americans and the Australian government was telling us was broadly true. You remember, Tony, on this program, John Pilger said I should be scared about the WikiLeaks motherlode because it would have all this terrible stuff. I finally found myself in a cable the other day. I was so thrilled, but I can't get it into the paper because it was quoting a published column that I wrote.
Okay,
and
all right.
we journalists have nothing to fear from WikiLeaks.
Tony,
Yeah, okay, well, very briefly, because we've got another question at least we need to come to, and we've got very little time to do that.
I cannot believe that you spew such nonsense as democracies tell the truth. Based on what WikiLeaks showed, are you able to actually say that with a straight face? What WikiLeaks showed us is that these governments knew what was happening, but they were so hypocritical, and they did nothing and said nothing and continued to sell weapons
that's
and
not
continued
true.
to have business deals with these bastards. What are you talking about?
Almost everything that we found in WikiLeaks, as Slavoj said, we already knew. Almost everything we found, we already knew. The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, everybody else.
That's what Mr. Zizek said. So, very briefly, John, you want to get in?
Yeah, well, I mean, talking about cables that come out, the students in the Arab Spring who went into the security buildings and took out the papers that hadn't been shredded, it was full of British companies offering in secret deals to sell equipment to Mubarak, spying equipment through email and so on.
Yeah, British
so
companies aren't the British government, and I wouldn't defend the Brits. I'm an Irishman, for God's sake.
OK, all right. No, sorry. We've got another question. You won't be disappointed. This is Q&A live from the Festival of Very Dangerous Ideas. Our next question comes from Oliver Damien.
My question is to the panel. If the selfish and blind pursuit of genes to propagate is what drove single cells to evolve into complex life forms, which includes us, can we say that the blind pursuit of profit is what drives civilization forward? And we should not stop it just because we don't like what we see now, given that the future cannot be fully imagined by someone on a lower level of evolution?
Slavoj.
It's maybe too philosophical question, but just a brief point. You know, we don't have time for theory now, I know, but, you know, people usually claim capitalism is egotist, just profit-seeking. No, I claim that what all good Marxist and theologists know, capitalism is implicitly, in a perverted way, religiously ethical. It's capital must circulate even if we all drop dead and so on. Like you have a metaphysical entity which has priority over our most immediate utilitarian concerns. So for me, what we need against capitalist greed is not some Christian morality, but good old-fashioned utilitarian egotism.
Are you actually calling for the return of Marxism, aren't you? I mean...
that's another complicated question. But nonetheless, to answer
not
that
so complicated
easy stuff, you know, I will give you a prediction, very short,
Yeah,
really.
okay.
What, to the gentleman's question before, what will happen? What will happen, probably, 90%, not 100, is in Egypt a pact between the army and Muslim Brotherhood.
It's already happening,
Yeah,
Zizek. It's
the
already
deal
happening.
would be, you Muslim Brotherhood get more or less ideological hegemony, we keep our corruption, and I guarantee you this pact will be blessed by the United States as force of continuity.
It pays 40% of the Egyptian army budget. It continues
to
bless
all of
it.
you. It's good to be able to continue the previous question, but we've had another question. And it really, you said it was philosophical, and it is. It's actually about the nature of capitalism and whether it's actually the best way forward. Let's hear from Kate.
The structure of religion.
Let's hear from Kate.
One of the things politicians so frequently talk about is that there must be more growth, more jobs, means better incomes for people, means a house, means having a nicer life in a material sense. And there is quite a lot of thought nowadays, perhaps coming from some quarters, about, well, is growth the thing we mean? When we go over the green fields, we eat all the food, we suck the goodness from the land, so it's hard to do anything. We do ever more in the way of smart travel and at greater speed. And I think there is a good argument, but not a popular one. And it's one of the things which we all embracing. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we just grew our own vegetables and we didn't get into the car and use all of this petrol and we didn't need new clothes every so often. It's a wonderful idea, except for me. But the idea of growth per se, I think, does need to be questioned, not at the cost of not letting people who are hungry stay hungry. And there's the difficult thing in this world. But I do think we need to think about how we could live life and be happier and warm, comfortable and full of food without endlessly building more, destroying the environment and living at a greater speed.
Let's go to John.
I agree with you only on one point. I don't think people want to be fed. I mean, it's quite serious.
Your name is not John. This is John.
Yeah, no, Kate's absolutely right. Capitalism isn't the problem. Growth is the problem. When you have companies, and I know you're going to hate this, but when you have companies that take psychopathy as a business model, like the American health insurance industry, where they'll try everything they can to deny claims. I told the story a couple of weeks ago of a little girl who died of leukemia because her health insurance company found a loophole and denied her the claim. That's the problem. Now, you know, is capitalism to blame for that? No, what the problem in that is this kind of lust for growth.
And there's a classic one in the pharmacology companies and the pharmaceutical companies in the medicalization of the human condition.
Yeah. Oh my God.
You do this, you do that.
Well, you know that the Manual of Mental Disorders used to be a pamphlet, 65 pages. It's now 886 pages.
My problem is I don't think evolution explains all of life, so it shouldn't explain all of
And you
business.
realise that the pharmaceutical industry in America is actually creating disorders such as childhood.
Part of capitalism.
Can I ask you, Slavoj, I'll take the risk and ask you a question.
Your own risk, yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, do you really see a return to communism?
No.
Marxism is the answer, because...
No, as I said yesterday...
Don't be afraid, join us, come back. You've had your anti-communist fun. It's time to get serious again.
Okay, I can tell you more jokes, but what I'm simply saying is that we are obviously approaching today some serious problems, ecology and so on. I don't think in the long term, these problems can be solved within the liberal capitalist democratic frame. I'm the first to admit, my gosh, I'm sorry to inform you, but I was a kind of a dissident. I was 5 years unemployed. I was not allowed to teach. So all I'm saying is that The problems are still here, which are the problems of commons, the problems of communism. As I said yesterday, communism is obviously not an answer, the 20th century communism. But sorry to tell you, the problems are here, and they will not run away.
Okay.
Tony,
Yep.
I'd like to answer your question actually by answering it along with two other questions. So it's going to be your question, WikiLeaks and the Arab Spring, quote unquote. Because
as long as it's quick.
I will try to talk very fast. If you follow the hashtag Occupy movement that is spreading across the United States now, it started in New York on Wall Street as a reaction against corporate greed. And also some people were saying too much money invested in politics. How was it inspired? It was inspired by seeing people across the Middle East and North Africa rising up against their various regimes and chanting things like bread, freedom, and social justice. They're not calling for communism, but they're calling for a system in which everybody feels a part of, and they're not. In the United States, we have more than 40 million people uninsured. I spent 5 years of my life recently, because I began as a freelancer, uninsured. In a country where you break a leg, go to the hospital, and you're bankrupt. So it's spreading across the US because people recognize this. And I went to the Wall Street thing, and it encapsulated for me at the first day of the protest, where you had these kids on the street saying, "Where's my bailout?" And you had these rich men in suits and women in fancy clothes sipping champagne at Cipriani's and taunting the people on the street. And you're thinking, this is wrong. This is where it's wrong.
All right, John, briefly, we have to wrap up.
Can I just say that a psychologist called Philip Tetlock recently completed a 20-year study where he studied people like us, sort of pundits on television, people who had kind of strong opinions, and he asked them 28,000 predictions over a 20-year period. Anyway, it turned out that a flick of a coin would have been more accurate, so I just think we should bear that in mind.
Okay, yeah, that's quite a good... OK, we don't have time to flip the coin, sadly. That's all we have time for. Please thank the Sydney Opera House and our wonderful panel of dangerous thinkers, Kate Adie, Slavoj Zizek, John Ronson, Mona Eltahawy and Greg Sheridan. OK. On October 17, we'll be presenting Q&A in Darwin, so if you can be there on that night, go to our website and register to join the audience. Next week on Q&A, we head back to politics with the Assistant Treasurer, Bill Short, and the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party, Julie Bishop, celebrated novelist and essayist, Richard Flanagan, the lawyer who led the discrimination action against Andrew Bolt, Ron Merkel QC, and News Limited journalist and author, Caroline Overington. Until then, good night.